Welcome everyone, good morning, evening and afternoon in the middle to all ladies, simps and general creatures watching this video for today as we get the first reset for this Season 4 in NA on this Tuesday, and then tomorrow it will come for EU as well. As we said to each other at the start of this week, now as we get to the end of the week, it is time to start to draw some conclusions, starting with Mythic Plus. How has the first week of Mythic Plus been, especially in a week where you get 6 new / old / new dungeons from the pool of available dungeons, with Mechagon dungeons, Karazhan dungeons, and then Iron Docks and Grimwell Depot, as well as the fact that on top of the new Affix for this season, we also have no cap on Valor, which means you can quickly, definitely way more quickly than the previous seasons of this expansion, bring your Mythic Plus pieces all the way up to 298 item level. Yes, there is still the limit of the rating, which you are barred from reaching because we are missing the Fortified week of next week to get more rating to unlock the full extent of your upgrading of Valor. But still, the uncapped Valor is definitely going to make you gear up much faster this season. So with that being said, we can start to take a look at how the situation has been after a week in this season, starting with the popularity and just how present each of the specs is in keys in Mythic Plus. Talking about tanks first, we have all key levels. We continue, to no surprise, to have Protection Paladin as the overall most popular tanks in all key levels. This is also the level where Protection Warrior turns out to be an almost decent tank at the same level as the other 3 below Paladin and Death Knight, Brewmaster, Guardian and Vengeance. This is also after the buff that Protection Warrior has received at the start of this season. The situation goes back to almost the Season 3 levels when you start looking at Keystone Master rating levels, so plus 20 key levels. You see that Blood Death Knight is back to its 40+%. Blood Death Knight finished Season 3 in the 42-ish% range. So we are getting into Season 4 and the situation hasn't changed. I was wondering whether or not we might have seen even more Popularity of Blood, because once we saw the balance tuning of Season 4 and we saw no significant buffs to the tanks, there was a minor one to Prot Warrior and a minor one to Prot Paladin, and then no significant nerfs to Blood DK, I was wondering if we could have gotten an even higher rise of Blood Death Knight players. We will see as we go deeper in the season and as we get to see more keys, higher keys than what we have seen now, if the situation is going to continue to evolve for Blood Death Knight. Most of the other tanks are not seeing too many changes. Perhaps the only meaningful one is the fact that Protection Warrior now is definitely more popular than the end of Season 3. It is almost passing Guardian Druid, and that also Brewmaster Monk is not as popular as the end of Season 3. Vengeance and Prot Paladin are slightly more popular in response. So that's only the minor changes. Obviously, Blood Death Knight is still the far and away more popular of tanks. And we will see, perhaps by next week already, if we start looking into plus 25 keys, if the situation is going to change or not. Then we can move into the situation for healers. So the overall situation for healers, if you look at all of the keys available, hasn't really changed too much. We still have 3 very popular specs: Holy Priest, Restore Shaman and Restoration Druid. 2 specs that are not very popular, Discipline and Mistweaver, and 1 spec which is, slowly losing out over time, which is Holy Paladin. Once you start getting a little bit higher, however, you start getting back into the Keystone Master plus 20 level. We do see that now Priest is slightly ahead of Restore Shaman. This is another thing I was wondering by the end of Season 3. Season 3 saw Shaman as the most popular healer, but only because Holy Priest took a while to become popular. It took a while to be seen as a very strong healer in Mythic Plus. So I was wondering if perhaps at the start of Season 4, with the notion that Holy Priest was already strong and the fact that the balance tuning did not nerf Holy Priest, if we could have seen a bigger advantage of Holy Priest in Mythic Plus. But for now, it doesn't seem that drastic. They are above Restore Shaman for the first time. They are ahead of them for the first time, but it's not very massive of a difference. Not really too many changes for the other healers. It is still very few Discipline Priest and Mysterious Monks, and then a little bit more Holy Paladins, but still quite less compared to their glory days of Season 1 and even Season 2 of Shadowlands, and then Resto Druid, which is the third best healer in Mythic Plus at the moment. You move into Melee DPS, and Melee DPS at first glance, once you look at all of the keys, look quite populated overall. You do have the outliers of Enhancement and Feral Druid being overall the least popular classes to play a Melee DPS in general. But then, you know, there is Fury Warrior, there is even Red Paladin at 9% representation, you have Survival, of course, Outlaw, Frost Death Knight, Windwalker, and Havoc Demon Hunter. There is representation, decent representation amongst all of these specs when you look at Mythic Plus as a whole. Once you start getting into the more competitive level of Mythic Plus, we do go back to a dominance, so to speak, of Survival. We still don't have enough keys to start looking at keys higher than 25, which is where Survival was reaching the 40% in the end of Season 3. So we will see maybe in a week, maybe in a couple of weeks, if that is still going to be the level that Survival will be at. The major difference, of course, is Outlaw. We ended Season 3 still with Subtlety as the most popular of the rogue specs, but we started Season 4 and it's definitely been a full switch for rogues. They have definitely almost all moved to play Outlaw, to the point that at the moment Outlaw is the second best, the second most broth Melee DPS spec, even above Windwalker, which is still popular, the third most popular Melee DPS spec overall. That's the main change from Season 3 to Season 4. The buffs that were given to Outlaw brought them to be more played, and now even in Mythic Plus as well. The last of the roles is the Ranged DPS. In the overall levels, of course, you do see Hunter being very popular. Hunter is, once again, the most popular class in the game when it comes to DPS. This is almost beating Warlock, and we aren't even considering Survival in this list. So that's how popular Hunter is at all levels. Once you get into the Keystone Master 3000 rating, you know, plus 20 key levels, you do see that we have once again the quite easy dominance of Destruction. So yes, they have been given nerfs in their AoE damage, and no, they didn't actually affect how powerful they were, at the very least compared to other specs. It doesn't matter if you're 50% more powerful than another spec, or if you're 20% more powerful. If you are more powerful, then you are gonna be broth every time. So the nerf hasn't really done too much to Survival, and the nerf hasn't really done too much to Destruction either. There aren't really that many changes overall. Perhaps the main change is that Frost Mage has lost even more compared to the end of Season 3 in favor of Fire Mage. Now, Fire, as you can see here, seems to be like the only choice for mages to bring in Mythic Plus keys, whereas previously there was more of an even split between Fire Mage and Frost Mage, but now it seems to be much more prevalent to choose Fire Mage instead. So in the end, the current situation, given by the amount of keys played by the different players, the different specs, the different level of keys, is something along these lines. For tanks, there is Blood Death Knight, which is clearly above all of the other tanks. There is a decent group in the middle of tanks, all of them. You know, you can see pros and cons of all of them, but generally they are quite understood to be far below Blood Death Knight, and then at the bottom you have the Lone Guardian Druid. So this is the case for tanks, and then you have healers, which is somewhat similar. You have Holy Priest and Resto Shamans at the top, and then Mistweavers and Discipline Priests at the bottom, with the two remaining ones, Holy Paladin and Resto Druid, being in the even middle. Don't be too taken away by these type of rankings, because these are also made by the quality of players that are actually playing these classes. So usually what happens when a spec becomes meta is that all of the best players, all of the most competitive players, and then everyone who watches these best players is going to follow their lead and is going to go and play certain specs other than others, which means certain specs might look to be even worse than they actually are, because they are not played by too many elite players at the spec. My example of different players bringing out different levels of skill for the spec they play comes into play for DPS, because this, for example, is the Melee DPS currently. Obviously, Subtlety Rogue and Assassination Rogue aren't that bad, particularly Subtlety is not that much worse than an Arms Warrior, for example. It's just that all of the top rogues, all of the best rogues, all of the rogues pushing for high rating are playing Outlaw, which means only the weakest or the more casual or the less interested in being competitive players are playing Subtlety right now, which is the result of their overall rating in Mythic Plus rankings right now. The top isn't really surprising. That's unfortunate because we were hoping to get some surprises. This was my main goal, my main wish for Season 4, to get some shake-up in the meta. Absolutely zero shake-up in the S tier of Mythic Plus because Survival and Windwalker are still there, and then Outlaw, we can count it technically as a surprise because it wasn't really there in Season 3. However, after the buff, we did see the growth. We did see it becoming more and more popular, so it was easily predictable that they were going to end up in this situation. Meanwhile, for the ranged DPS, the situation being as follows. Perhaps the more surprising thing in here, based on the keys being completed, is Shadow Priest. Seeing Shadow Priest so high. Obviously, Shadow Priest is a single spec, so it's not like the case of Outlaw, where if Outlaw is OP, then no good player is going to play Subtlety and Assassination, meaning they are going to end up at the bottom. In the case of Shadow Priest, you have no other option. In the case of Shadow Priest, you have to play Shadow Priest or you have to reroll completely to a different class. So Shadow Priest is doing quite well. Fire Mage is actually teaming up with Destruction at the top as perhaps a surprise, although this is just, as a guideline to indicate roughly the situation of the specs in Mythic Plus. Destruction is still quite handily above Fire Mage when it comes to the raw power they can have, particularly in trash packs, particularly in AoE. And then at the bottom, two specs that felt like they have been at the bottom the entire expansion, Affliction and Arcane Mage. There hasn't really been any happy changes for them. Arcane was even buffed in Season 4, and this didn't really do much of anything. Even Affliction, even though they are growing a little bit, we have seen this in the preview of the raid situation, how Affliction is doing better. Definitely not changing their current situation in Mythic Plus anytime soon, actually, unfortunately for them. However, I'm not here to pity them since they have two meta specs right now, Destruction and Demo. So please don't bitch, Warlocks, if you don't have all three of your specs being Flavor of the Month. I think two is enough. Now, talking about dungeons themselves, talking about the place in which all of these specs have to actually go in and play. Well, I'm gonna give you a mini game here. I'm gonna show you all of the top 100 highest completed keys and tell me what are the things in common that you can see in all of these keys. Just at first glance, the first thing that comes up in your mind when you see all of these keys. Well, of course, the first thing that comes into your mind is that it's a whole bunch of Mechagon Junkyard keys, a whole bunch of Gambit, and a whole bunch of Streets keys. That's what comes into your mind when you see the top 100 keys being completed in Mythic Plus, because those three are the far and away easiest keys currently, at the very least in this week, which is ending. This weekly Affix setup has made these three dungeons by far the easiest. And Lower Karazhan and Upper Karazhan, both of them combined, are easily the worst ones to complete, the worst ones to time at the moment. Yes, we have gotten some nerfs, yes, we have gotten some hotfixes, but still, even with all those changes, they do remain by far harder than the other keys. We could jump, but I won't, but we could jump into a discussion about how these dungeons were tuned in Legion, how the damage was being done in those keys. There is a lot of one-shot potential, there is a lot of very heavy hits, which I fear, unfortunately, will only get worse next week, because next week you get Fortified, so it's gonna make it even worse in trash packs and the damage they can dish out. Now, talking about next week, to finish, we have just gotten through this week, which was a tyrannical week. We had a pretty handy, pretty smooth week because it was tyrannical, inspiring, and quaking, so it's quite handy. Now, unfortunately, next week, after tyrannical, inspiring, and quaking, we have Fortified, sanguine, and grievous. Now, Blizzard has previously swapped around some of the affixes, changed them a little bit, so I'm not sure if this is going to be what we get. If we just follow the normal rotation of last season, this is what we will get. So Fortified, Sanguine and Grievous. Sanguine could be quite the hassle in quite a few of the Karazhan pools due to the very short, very narrow corridors, which makes it quite hard for Sanguine to work properly. It's gonna be pretty much the same version, the same annoyance of Quaking, except even worse, actually, compared to this week. Also, Grievous, at the very least, is not that problematic. However, I feel like it's gonna make those Karazhan dungeons even worse with the amount of damage the party can take in those two keys. Grievous might start to be a little bit more of a nuisance compared to more laid back keys like Gambit or like Streets or like Junkyard. So next week is not one of the worst Fortified weeks for sure, because we won't have Inspiring with Fortified, we won't have Bolstering with Fortified, we won't have Necrotic with Fortified, so it's not one of the worst weeks, but it's definitely not one of the easier ones, particularly in certain keys where Sanguine is quite more annoying than usual. It's not as free as, for example, Halls of Atonement Sanguine. Who cares about Halls of Atonement Sanguine, right? So we will see just how much more tough these old recycled dungeons are going to be with this Affix combination. After all, we need to combine our tyrannical scores with our Fortified scores. So sooner or later, we will have to get into Fortified Karazhan keys, unfortunately, I have to say. So, with this being said, we have the recap, the overview, and the outlook of what's gonna come in Mythic Plus by the end of this week and the start of the next week. We have still room for a few more tuning fixes, perhaps some few nerfs in Mythic Plus keys from Blizzard in the next few days. We will just see eventually how many things are going to change. For today, we can stop our recap of Mythic Plus. Of course, as usual, thank you to all of my patrons for supporting me. Here is the usual round of applause. Supporting me in these times is quite handy, because we are getting quite busy by the end of Shadowlands and getting into Dragonflight, so it's quite nice to know that I have your support as I continue to dish out, to produce content for all of you. Further support can also be given by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel. The comments for today are going to be about, of course, this one being a Mythic Plus themed video, your first takes of this first week of Mythic Plus. How did you find revisiting all of these older dungeons that you have played several years ago? Or perhaps, how did you feel if you were a player who never played Warlords, or maybe never played Legion, or even never played BFA, to try for the first time these dungeons in Mythic Plus version? I will be interested to know your takes on this new set of dungeons in this last season of Shadowlands. And lastly, for further imaginary friend behavior, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right down at these links. Subscribing, which of course will also give you access to my Discord server. If you ever want to pop by, ask a few questions, some feedback about the videos, perhaps some tips, some ideas about future content, or even just to have a chat about whatever you want, usually I am available on Discord at any time. With this being done with, I can now leave you to the rest of your reset day in NA, or to the rest of your completely useless Tuesday for EU. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I had to eat approximately about 30 minutes ago, and I just dragged this on and on and on because I had to finish this video, and I don't exactly have the gift of synthesis when making videos, unfortunately.